So why don't we start, Steve, if you don't mind. Most folks here probably know you, but give a little bit of context on who you
So
are.
the guy who knows the least about New York ecosystem is going to start. That's lots of sense. Okay. No, but I have to tell you, it was the only intro I've ever heard that used the word entrepreneur, George II, and Zyglist in the same sentence. It was pretty impressive. So I think why I'm here, other than this is the 4th annual Steve Blank something
That's
or
what I
other,
hear,
which I
yes.
didn't even know, is besides teaching entrepreneurship at a couple of universities, I have an interest in the history of how entrepreneurial ecosystems started. And I was a serial entrepreneur for 21 years, retired after 8 startups, and started teaching on some schools on the East Coast. Obviously not as good as the schools. There's the schools on the West Coast, not as good as the schools on the East Coast. But I was really interested on how the Silicon Valley ecosystem evolved, and was stunned to actually, shouldn't have been, that there really wasn't a single history of how that happened. I'm going to give you the punchline. In Silicon Valley, it was serendipity and the Cold War. Stanford's entrepreneurship culture started with a single professor named Fred Terman, who happened to run electronic intelligence and electronic warfare in the United States during World War II, came back to Stanford, hired all his World War II engineering managers, and decided to turn Stanford into an engineering powerhouse in microwaves and electronics in the 1950s. And during the Cold War, the US military essentially turned all research universities into Cold War engineering laboratories. Stanford had a secret 400-person weapons lab, as well as Columbia and University of Michigan and MIT, et cetera, during the Cold War that focused on electronic intelligence and electronic warfare. And Terman did something unique that no other university at the time did. He basically, and Orrin would have freaked out then, he basically said to any of his grad students or professors, take your technology, help the country, go take it, start a company, and all you needed to do was shake hands with Terman that you would do something good with whatever you invented in the lab. And Stanford and the Silicon Valley ecosystem started with the intersection of a tech university with extreme interest and extreme focus on a single domain, which were microwaves, and maybe another one, electronics, a ecosystem of ready customers, in this case, military weapons system suppliers, and then eventually a risk capital culture that emerged after these first two. And Stanford and Silicon Valley were what I call a serendipitous accident. What's interesting, and I'm interested to hear from the rest of the panels, is that New York is only one of the 3 ecosystems for startups that have been engineered, period, in the entire world, or at least successful ecosystems. I'd say Beijing, I'd say Israel, and I'd say New York have been consciously engineered with investments in finance, investments in technology universities, and reinvention of an entrepreneurial culture that was lacking. And I'm just amazed on how quickly New York has reinvented itself to do that. Just as an aside, for those of you interested in the Silicon Valley story, there's a couple of videos on YouTube called The Secret History of Silicon Valley, and explains how essentially the NSA and CIA funded the Valley in the 50s. But I'm really interested to hear the New York version of the story.